Hi, and welcome to How to Make a Podcast. I'm here. I'm your host, Mary Treyz, and I'm here with my co-host, Hudson Main. We were asked by the philosophy department, and we'll just blame Dr. Matheson straight up. So in case anybody wants to contact anybody, it's Dr. Jonathan Matheson.
Yeah, put a name on it.
That he asked us to make this little podcast about podcasting. In case you were interested in doing it on your own. And the idea is we're going to tell you how we work and some of the, I think, useful information that we've learned over the years. Our podcast is called How to Ruin Dinner. And we have, I think, 88 episodes over 7 years, I think I've been doing it. And Hudson's been with me for a year.
Just about
a year.
Like 6 months,
Yeah. So we're happy to be here and tell you what we've learned. Hudson, you want to add anything before we get started?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can do some intros, but we're really going to just be talking about how maybe students can get into podcasting. I know a lot of different professors have kind of assigned this as work, kind of connecting with the newer generation, I guess. So we're going to just talk about this a little bit. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Hudson Main. I'm a first-year history graduate student here at UNF. I was a TA last semester. I graduated 2 semesters ago with my undergraduate in history and political science. And then I've been working with Mary here for 6 to 8 months-ish doing How to Ruin Dinner. With our different guests.
Yeah. Where we talk about all kinds of topics. So we'll get into how to choose topics. I guess I should say my introduction to. Okay. Well, I work in the philosophy department and the religious studies department as an adjunct professor, and I've been at UNF for a lot of years. I think 20 years now, and I teach humanities, intro to humanities, an introduction to philosophy, comparative religion. I got my PhD in feminist theologies at Fordham University many years ago now. And I mean, it's worth, I think, just starting with the idea of how I began this podcast. And really one of the things that I noticed was that I like to listen to a lot of podcasts, and I find that I learn really well through conversations. It's a way to stimulate questions for me, and so that's what interested me in the beginning, to have the opportunity to invite experts on, to ask them questions about areas of study or interest to me that maybe I don't know enough about or that I want to talk about to learn more from. So I think one of the questions you might want to start with is asking yourself, why do I want to do a podcast? And if it's just an assignment, that's fine. That's great. Insofar as it gives you a way of thinking about ideas in a dialogue form, I think it's useful.
Yeah, and I'll say, I feel like I'm coming to podcasting from a completely different angle. I think I have a proclivity to be against, the podcast archetype, the type of person who makes a podcast. I think has a lot of different, we can put a lot of different labels on it. But what I do like and what I do a lot in my history classes is seminar conversation. And so even though I feel like I was kind of against podcasting for a while, I feel like it's still a productive form of media that kind of brings out great conversations. And so no matter where you're coming from, I think you can find through dialogue and through just being interested in research that podcasting is just another way to have, conversations with people who know a lot.
Yeah.
So I found that really fulfilling.
And it's another outlet for your research, right? To sort of probe your research. I find that part most fun. We should just say, Hudson, that one of the things that I like about working with you is that we often disagree. We come at things from a different point of view. I'm always dragging you behind, right? So why the question of why a podcast, and here's um, a bad reason, maybe, but everybody has one.
Yeah.
And so I said it's a bad reason because you wouldn't jump off the Brooklyn Bridge if everybody else was doing it, right? But it does tell you something that there's so many of them,
Hmm.
right? That people are listening to them, obviously, but I think also the pull of conversation is there. People want to be in conversation, and even the listener is able to sort of join in the conversation, even if not in a live way, by thinking, "Oh, that's what I wanted to know," or "Oh, why isn't she asking blah blah blah?"
Hmm.
So, although I've labeled because everybody else has one as a bad reason, I think it's actually maybe not so bad. A worse reason is maybe that you like to hear yourself speak.
Yeah, I fear that's a lot of podcasters nowadays. Like it, like I think you were kind of hinting to it earlier with why so many people are kind of interested in podcasting. I feel like we're not going to get into a deep dive in this, but I think COVID had a big responsibility for that too. So many people now don't have a social outlet, right? They don't have ways to talk to people like they did before lockdowns and before, you know, I mean, COVID did so many different things to us, but podcasting has kind of come up as like a response to that. People are getting their ideas out in different ways, and you can do it online, you can do it in person.
Yeah.
We have a setup here in person, but you can do this over Zoom as we have a lot of guests in, and it's just become a really easy way to kind of get those stimulating
But
conversations
it
out.
does have a little artificiality to
Yes,
it.
it
Like
does.
you
Yeah,
get to be in control of the
yeah.
conversation, and you do hear yourself talk. So,
Which can be difficult.
which
Yeah.
right, it has its pros and cons. The worst reason, however,
Okay.
the worst reason I think to have one is because you think you're the smartest person in you know everything, and you know everything. I mean, that's rarely true of anyone,
Yeah.
even if you're an expert in one little area. So that kind of closed-mindedness is not a great um, reason to have a podcast, just to sort of uh, spout your points of view. I think what's missing in a lot of our conversations generally is curiosity and openness. So because because you know it all is not a great reason, I would say, to have a podcast.
And I will say, like, I feel like academics and even especially philosophers get a bad rep for being the, the know it all type. But I
That's
find that
economists. We all know
we
that's
all can point
economists.
to we can all point to someone else.
That's the economist.
But I find though that most of the guests that we have that are scholars, like they are the most humble, right? Like
Well,
they
they
come,
should be the most
yeah,
curious, and it's curiosity you really want to exploit and explore when you're hosting a podcast or when you're putting together a podcast. Like, as opposed to saying, "Hey, I've got all this information to share," it can be useful to think of it as, "Hey, what do I want to learn here?"
yeah. And I think that's a good segue too to what is the purpose of podcasting, right? Like,
Yeah.
and this is something I think you do really well, and that's putting yourself in the listener's shoes, right? Like you said earlier, you're asking questions for the listener. And once you start to think about it that way, it's easy to pull down a lot of your own ego with topics too. You're always putting yourself into a position where people can listen and follow along no matter where they're at. But it also depends on what type of podcast you want to make. I mean, we talked about earlier, um, like different podcasts will expect different things from their listeners. So maybe you want to kind of go into some of that. I know we were talking, there's some philosophy podcasts that expect you to know
Right.
at least an intro level, but there's different levels, right?
Right. Yeah. I think you do have to be considering the question of who are my listeners, and you have to act as the host, as a kind of surrogate for the listener. So you want to ask questions. Maybe you do know the answer. You personally know the answer, but you want to give the listener the benefit of the doubt. What you don't need to assume they know everything.
Even if it feels obvious, yeah.
Even if especially like we've had lots of experts on, and the use of the acronyms comes up really often, and you have to say, hey, hold on, tell us what that means. What does that stand for, and what do they do? I think people just get so used to acronyms that they don't realize the other person has no idea what that is or what they do
And
at
sometimes,
OSHA or whatever it is, right?
yeah, and sometimes like we have to put the acronyms in the podcast notes, but you have to think, even when you're doing that, you're maybe taking away from some listeners who might not be able to follow along with the notes as they're listening, right?
Right.
People listen to podcasts in cars, in areas where they're not looking at something, they're just listening. So all of this is like directional input that you need to think about when you're making a podcast too.
That's that directional input, very sophisticated.
Oh, no,
Okay,
no.
I like it. Hey, you want to talk a second about the podcast you do with your buddies and how that's different from what you and I do?
Yeah. So I do a little side podcast called the Four Guys Podcast. It's meant to be a little more lighthearted, right? Even in the name. We basically book out the UNF library equipment, and it's a little box in the third floor. It gets a little hot, but basically we just talk politics and whatever is like real-time news.
From your perspective.
From our perspectives as students, it's not meant to be a authoritative position.
But you are all history majors.
We're history and poli-sci. It's mainly poli-sci majors.
Oh, no.
But yeah, like we all have interests in history, in poli-sci. We have minors and history majors.
So you come with
student.
a level of education, a college level education, and interest in the subject matter. And then on top of that, you have friendships, right? So that it allows you to have a more natural conversation and tease each other, and you're about the same age, and right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to yell at each other.
Right.
I mean, it's almost, we talked about it earlier, like it's almost like a study session, right?
Yeah.
Like we are bringing what we've heard from the news to conversation, to argue it out, figure out what's going on. And then it's almost like therapeutic as well, because it's different than what a normal conversation has. Like podcasting gives you an excuse to talk about things you wouldn't bring up in normal conversation with your friends. Like we would talk about this because like we know we're into that. But when we bring on guests, like we wouldn't talk to necessarily these guests about current news, about our political takes, about whatever. So when you make a podcast, it's an excuse to bring people together to talk about things you wouldn't normally as well.
So even though it's friendly and there's banter, it is purposeful conversation.
Yeah.
It's not conversation you're having at a dinner party or at the bar.
No.
Or, I mean, there may be some feel of camaraderie, but it is directed conversation. So I do like that idea of a study group, and I do encourage people to have study groups for that reason, right? It lets you see where somebody else's perspective takes them, right? And we do come to our ideas from particular perspectives. So having four people who have different takes on things. And if I recall, you don't all have the same political leaning necessarily.
No, we would say like, I mean, we're all kind of towards one, angle or one side. I mean, two of us are like independent, affiliated, but like if you ask them a few more questions, like with most independents, they will lean one side, which is generally to the left. And then usually John and I are a little further to the left.
Yeah.
So, but it's fun either way. So, and we've invited different guests that have conservative leanings to talk, and it's just a good excuse again to get it out.
Yeah. I think that idea of it being a fun way to have a serious conversation
or
is worth noting.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but like in our history classes, like we try to reach out to different scholars for conversation to talk about whatever their recent interest is. This podcast has been like the most like it's the biggest excuse for me to reach out to more of them, right? Like
Yeah.
for some of our guests, it's been my history professors.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to get one-on-one with them unless it was office hours, but not in the same way that podcasting does. So for people who are maybe worried that it will be like a waste of time to podcast, I don't know. Like you can bring your own personal agendas to the conversation and really to forward them well. So those conversations are really helpful.
Well, that gets us maybe to this question that is really, I think, well, it's not the way my notes are, so maybe I'll hold off and go stick
Yeah.
with the notes that I've made and just pay attention to the fact that it sometimes is really hard. You make these episode notes that you and questions that you prepare and you think, okay, this layout is great.
Yeah.
But as the conversation goes on, if you're paying attention to the conversation, you do want to allow the conversation, you want to leave room for the conversation to lead you to or through what is relevant. But I'm going to pull back from doing that because I was going to skip to how to book guests. But let's stay on my notes here for a minute. And my next set of notes was this question about co-hosting. Do you have a co-host? Do you not have a co-host? I've done both, and there are times when maybe you can't come, and I'll do it by myself. Having a co-host for me has again meant that I have a broader perspective, particularly in my situation. I'm interested in having student co-hosts, and I have only had student co-hosts because I think they, of course, bring a different generational perspective, but also they bring a different academic perspective. And so I think that's really useful. So when you're thinking about, well, am I going to do this podcast by myself or with a co-host, you really want to consider again how rounded do you want this conversation to be? What are my limits as the host? What would be helpful to add to my perspective? And for me, okay, let's just say it, youth and just a different worldview is really good for my conversational and my learning styles.
Yeah, I think it's like a trend in scholarship across disciplines, right? And we were asked to make this podcast because it's a part of public philosophy.
Yes.
Part of this trend, historians will call it like a generational kind of gap, or that there's some, I don't want to use the word progression because it's not inherently good, but there's been leanings to see that all perspectives are valuable, right? That academics should have conversations with everyone, right? There isn't an old guard that's going to prevent informational, transfer. That there's always going to be conversation, and it's always going to be important because that's the reason why there are academics, right? Is to make their work part of either the mainstream or to integrate it into life. But I think as an assistant, or you like to say a co-host,
Yeah,
there's
I don't
there's
think
different
of it,
labels,
yeah,
but
I don't think of it as co-host of assistant. I think of it as co-host.
I want to talk a little bit about just either being a co-host or being an assistant, either one. I was a TA last semester and
Better tell them what that acronym is.
teacher's assistant. Actually, I was a GTA, graduate teacher's assistant, but the semester before I was a research assistant and a TA where I just did grading. But last semester, because I was a graduate student, I was expected to teach a full lecture by myself for one of the class periods. So Dr. McClure, who I TA'd for, she basically told me that, hey, I would have this class and I would basically be her, right? I would be giving a lecture. I felt out of place, right? I felt like there was this imposter syndrome that I had to get over, that it wasn't my place to be lecturing people who were my age and older because I graduated pretty early. But there's something that I want to say, and that's you can kind of get over experience through preparation. And even though I didn't feel like I was ready, there was still value for me kind of stepping into that. For myself, one, because now I feel even more confident about going into a room and sounding confident about things, even if I don't know them. But I brought humility to that lecture too. When I stepped into Dr. McClure's
If you say
shoes,
so yourself.
yeah. I mean, this sounds really arrogant, but I mean, when I got in there, I said, obviously, like, I want y'all to ask questions. I'm not going to have the answers for you. Like, I am not Dr. McClure. I have not spent, decades, researching this, probably a decade. I'm kind of overestimating her, but there's value in that. And so right now I'm an editorial assistant for a journal, the Ethnohistory Journal with Duke Press, and I work for Dr. Bosi, and my job is to kind of keep her on track because she knows infinitely more than me on the subject. It's my job to kind of keep her organized, to ask questions, because the journal is posited to a graduate level reading level. It's my job to bring that perspective, and it is valuable. So everyone's perspectives are valuable. That's kind of the lesson.
Absolutely.
And bring everyone to the table, regardless of where they're at.
And I think you hit the salient point. As long as you're not acting as if you know more than you do, you will bring value. The temptation to, and I think where imposter syndrome is problematic, is when you are really trying to fake it. I don't like that saying, fake it till you make it, because there should be no faking it. It should be an honest exchange of, ideas. And if your idea turns out to have missed important aspects or information or facts, that's what you want to fill, right? You want to ask the question, and you want to feel free to ask the maybe naive question or the uninformed question, in order to have the expert answer you and help you see the sort of round view. So I think you make a mistake in thinking of yourself as an imposter. You should see yourself as starting out and as inquisitive.
Yeah, I think this is like the biggest difference between humanities positions and like traditional jobs, either like in service or, I mean, there's any type of job where you have to have an internship and you kind of go through the ranks. They always tell you fake it till you make it so you can get a promotion. In this kind of job and in humanities, I think it's really important to be honest with your own limitations.
Yeah. That's
and to be honest with your own position. Yeah,
right,
sorry.
where you'll find information you didn't know you were missing, because the expert will be quick to tell you, oh, wait, hold on, go back and consider this point. And that's really what the listener also wants to know. What I think most listeners want to know, what have I got wrong here, as much as they want to know, factual information. Part of that factual information is clarifying what they don't know or what they misunderstand.
And something you told me earlier is like, you're not in competition if you're not trying to challenge in every way. Like, if you don't think of yourself as that, above all position, that you're arrogant about what you already know, you're not going to be an imposter, because if you're honest with your own position, there's like, you are you. Like, that's not, you can't be an imposter. And part of like my editorial assistant position is looking through peer-reviewed articles. I'm in the reviewing process, so I see scholars giving reviews of other scholars' works in the long journey, as you know, that publishing takes. I mean, when you publish a journal article, it takes a year and a half. I'm seeing scholars, even call each other out about how, I don't think you actually consulted, the archives, and you say you did.
Yeah,
the problem
that's the worst.
The problem
that's
is that
so
you're saying that you did. And it's the same thing with podcasting, like at a lower level. But if you're not trying to be something you aren't, there isn't going to be an issue.
Right. And or I think that one example I made in my notes was, you know what, you have to be you. Joe Rogan is already Joe Rogan. You can't be Joe Rogan. He took that position, right?
Yeah.
So all you have to bring is quite easy. You have to bring yourself with the knowledge you have. And in preparation for the conversation, you might have developed some questions and some facts, but you don't have to bring any more than that, and you really shouldn't.
I think a good example of this was when we had Dr. Gellers on at the beginning of this last semester. I wrote in my notes, like, and I talked to you before the episode. I was like, I don't know if we can talk about the Anthropocene. Like, I didn't know if we were going to go a certain way,
Right.
and I thought it might have left the conversation. Dr. Gellers brought it up on his own,
Yeah,
and then I was like, oh, okay, this is fine, right? And then
right.
that's why it's important to be cautious, and I think that's why we've started recording the intros at the end of the episodes, right? Because you don't know
You don't know
where
where
the conversation's
conversation's
going.
gonna go. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the kind of I think technical, how do you put the episodes together that you come to find out you're comfortable with. And we can sort of jump to that idea of how to how to pick a format. And that, you know, introductory sort of spot is part of a sort of the framework I'm using is kind of a classic 5-paragraph essay format, just because it's so neat and so clean and it fits into a prescribed amount of time probably. And we usually go for about an hour. I try to go for between 45 minutes and an hour. I know people can stop and start a podcast. So if they have 20 minutes, they can listen for 20 minutes. I don't want to go much more over an hour because I don't want it to ramble too much. And a lot of these super long podcasts, if you listen to them, the rambling is a
Yeah.
bit self-indulgent.
And that goes into what you think the purpose of your podcast is.
Yes.
Like, I think rambling is fine if you acknowledge that at the beginning and you know that it's going to affect the listening experience.
Well, you're actually wrong on that, Hudson, but
Okay,
rambling
like-
is never good.
Okay. Well, the most successful podcasts are just people rambling about what they
Yeah, but
it depends on what you want,
okay.
right? Like, if you just start looking at it that way,
Yes.
then yes. But like, I think for How to Ruin Dinner, like, yeah, we try to cut it off at an hour
Yeah.
15. Sometimes it goes a little over because we're in a mid-argument or
Right.
someone has a proposition that they want to add or, but you have to be honest with that at the beginning, just like you're honest with yourself. And it's a bigger idea of introspection, right? Think about what you're going to do and make dedicated effort
I
to that. Yeah.
I think you can also lose the impact of the discussion if you allow it to ramble too much. So sometimes we'll get into, 45 minutes and we'll have this new idea come up. And I've often cut us off there.
Yeah.
Because it to my mind, it will dilute both ideas. And so I rarely want to do that. Now, I think what we do is we cut it off and then we keep talking.
I was going to say that, then we talk for 3 more hours.
then-
Yeah.
And then you're thinking, God, why didn't I record that? And I have heard podcasters and Ira Glass from This American Life say, do not turn the recording off. Never turn off the recording. And I think that's probably really good advice. And I think we've lost lots of interesting things. On the other hand, there is a trust level with the
Yes.
guest. And the guest is much freer when the tape is, I know it's not a tape, but whatever.
It feels like that, yeah.
When you're no longer recording, the guest is freer. And I think part of your responsibility as a host is to honor the guest's parameters and what they want. And if you record when they don't know it, I think that's a problem. You will always want the guest to know when you're recording. I just think that's a kind of moral choice you have to make. Right?
Yeah. And for How to Ruin Dinner, like, we're just using it as an example. Like, we don't have the funding to necessarily pay people or pay guests to show up. These guests
We
are
don't pay anybody anything.
Yeah. I wasn't going to go into that. But no. We, like, the guests are volunteering their time, and it's
Yeah.
important to honor that.
And they came to talk about their book, or they came to talk
Yeah.
about their subject, and they want to protect that area of interest, and they don't really want to come on and talk about something that they're not expert in.
Yeah. And that's why I think before we record as well, I tend to ask the guests for that Dr. Geller's episode, like, hey, is it okay if I
Right.
bring up this? Do you feel comfortable with this? Because the last thing you want is to make someone feel cornered.
Yes.
Because in a lot of situations, they are supposed to be the authoritative voice, right? Like
Yeah.
in their mind, they're thinking that. In the audience's mind, they're thinking that. So it becomes like there's a lot of anxiety with that. And I think part of what we were talking about earlier, I wanted to bring it up, and I'm glad you brought it up, was that people tend to feel more comfortable with the recording off. I think maybe sometimes if you just leave the recording on and say we're not going to use this right now, but we're going to get into it later, and we'll give a start, right? People will get more comfortable with the recording on. It's intimidating for especially scholars who tend to work independently, who don't work in collaborative, works. This conversation is intimidating, and people who are introverted, like these are still humans, right? Like they aren't above this. So it's important
Yeah.
again to take all of
And
that
the
into account.
equipment is a bit intimidating, and
Yeah.
and the
The lights.
this is our first
lights are
time with
bright.
the camera, so we're a little intimidated by the camera. So that if you're thinking about these formats in terms of 5-paragraph essays, your introduction is going to introduce the podcast, yourself, your co-host, the guest, and the thesis of the episode.
Yeah.
I mean, then you can think of that as like 4 or 5 sentences, and you're going to make your claim. And then you get into the questions. I like to ask the guest to introduce themselves and and I don't give them a whole lot of direction, although to wind back a little bit, when I'm booking them and when I'm asking people to come on, I'll often have 3 or 4 email exchanges where I tell them what my interest is in the subject, what questions I'm thinking about in terms of the topic. It's not like I'm giving them a set of questions that I'll definitely ask, but I am sending a kind of idea of where we're going to go and why I am interested in that topic.
Or even where you're at as a
Yes.
host. Like I know for the recent last semester, like there were emails like, hey, this is what I've been thinking about a lot recently. This is what I'm interested in. What are you interested in? Let's kind of bring these together some way.
Right.
And there's not that direction, like you said. I mean, there's like a little bit, but it's not like we're going to talk about this,
Yeah.
and this.
The questions
Yeah.
are not cast in stone.
No.
I do want them, of course, and they want to have an idea of what we're going to talk about. But I like having, and you and I have disagreed a little bit
Yeah.
about this, and we came up with a compromise of putting a lot of the information in the episode notes. But I personally like to ask the guests to introduce themselves. Invariably, what I find is they bring information that I would not have found out, right? And sometimes they'll practically start at birth, and you're like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't want to know
Don't say
about
that.
your childhood. And then, almost without fail, it does give you important information that you wouldn't have, or you find out they got to their topic through some crazy, circuitous academic route or job route, and you would never have known to ask that stuff. So I do find that people, and it's a warm-up for them too.
Yeah.
So I do like to sort of, in the introduction, allow the guest to introduce themselves. Another way, I think you're more prone to a classic,
Ye-
like the kind of introduction you would get at a lecture, where the MC, the host, would tell you about the credentials of the person.
Yeah, so I think it's just being it's how I've been trained recently, like in history classes. our compromise has been that we let the guests introduce themselves, which I think is great, because what they're bringing to you is what they think is important
Yes.
more than anything else. And then in the episode notes, I will put like, or like either one of us will put their like traditional accolades, right?
Right. And
That
where
they
they
might
went to
not bring up
school. Right. They might bring
because
it
they're
up.
humble too.
Right.
Like a lot of them are humble. Like they're not going to say, "Oh, I won a Bancroft Prize for my latest, book." That's a big deal. They might not say that. It's important to kind of, I think, put that a little
Yes,
bit.
I think it's important that we establish their bona
Yeah.
fides. And that's really what you're doing. You're saying this person is an expert in their training as well as their writing, and they've been recognized by their peers in these through these awards is absolutely important.
Well, and like tomorrow, or either tomorrow or in 2 days, I'll be headed off to Daytona for the SAWH, Southern Association of Women's Historians conference, and it's like a 4-day history conference. And so for those discussions, it's less personal, right? Like at the beginning of each speaker, there's going to be the organizer will give, it
Yeah.
is this person, they have this education, this is a recent publication, they won this award, they're interested in this.
And you do that in
It's-
order to
yeah.
establish the expertise and the credentials of the speaker.
And to honor the time that they've put into
And-
this as well. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. So, how you want to go about that is up to you, and you kind of feel your way through it. Again, it's kind of comes back to what kind of conversation do you want to have? Do you want it to be super formal? Do you want it to be more of a back and forth? All that comes out. The 3 paragraph, like the body of the
Yeah.
paragraph, this is where your research is going to be important, right? And how much you read of your guest's work or look at their artwork or investigate their, background and the background of the topic you're
Yeah.
discussing. So last semester, we did a whole semester around AI. And a lot of our time was spent developing our experience with AI. I mean, for me at least, I played you. You didn't want to even touch it, but
I did once.
I spent a lot of time like playing with AI, so I would have the questions about it from my experience of it. You were great. You are great about reading materials that they've written and drawing from those materials, those articles and the guest work to ask them specific questions about their own ideas. And to me, that if we go back for a second to that, having 2 people to have 2 co-hosts, we bring really different approaches in that sense, and I think that's helpful for the listener.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying about like preparation versus experience. I know that I don't have the most experience in this, so the most value that I can bring is at least reading the guest's work and trying to make connections there. So whether they're a musical composer, I will try to listen to their latest pieces, or if they're a traditional historian, I'll try to read their recent articles or even their social media pages. Like it feels a little stalkerish at times,
Yes.
but like as a guest, I'm sure that feels at least like honorific or fulfilling that someone is listening to you, because at least in academia, like you don't get a lot of that feedback that we hope we would, right? Unless you're at a conference in a Q&A session.
Which is
or
why
it's your own students, you don't get
conferences
it.
are so important, by the
Yeah.
way, right? And in some ways, you could think of the podcast as the question and answer series after a lecture. So we'll post as part of our episode notes what articles and books the guest has out, so that the listener can go back and reference them. But those 3 sort of paragraphs are about dredging up information about the topic itself and your guest's perspective on it. So there's two ways of dealing with the information there, right?
Yeah.
And you want them both to be kind of fact-based. And that gets us to the conclusion. And conclusions are, a summing up, right? And they feel kind of reductive in some ways generally when you're writing them. For me, I've thought of the conclusion as an opportunity to sort of humanize the
Yeah.
guest, and so we have this maybe stilted uh, uh, a trope of asking how have the guests to tell us a way in which they've ruined dinner, and some of the answers have been awesome. Some people don't want to answer it, and they'll because I usually say that in the email exchanges that I'm going to ask them for a story about how they ruined dinner. And some people don't want to share that, and they'll say, "I don't know, I don't want to, I don't want to do that." Maybe they think it's too corny, for a lot of reasons. But it does tend to humanize the guest, and it leaves the episode on a kind of light note, right? For us, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I think it's important too, like, one, to humanize the guests, but two, this is your opportunity to kind of get perspective too, to look in the future and say, like for our AI episodes, like, where do you think this is going to be?
Yeah, that's
It's because we don't have concrete, that's not going to be in the body, right? You don't have
yeah,
any research on that. I mean, you're predicting, right? And
right.
so, like, part of that humanizing effort, at least for the episode with Dr. Romero, was he would make a wager about where AI will be in 10 years, right? That's
Yeah,
not something you can really talk about in the middle of the episode,
right,
but it's something to kind of leave us off on.
right.
And then maybe that's an excuse, to bring them back later.
Yes,
Um,
or a good reason to,
yeah.
not even an excuse. If you're listening to podcasts and you're thinking about this stuff, listen to how they end their episodes. Some of my favorite will ask the guests, like, what book recommendations do you
Yeah.
have? Or what are you listening to these days? Like, what other podcasts are you listening to? Or what music are you listening to? And they veer from, I think a lot of conclusions are super personal, and many of them are more sort of probing in terms of how should I move forward in my research kind of approach.
Yeah, it's really important to personalize the episode to the guest, right? So for the Four Guys podcast, we recently, and by recently I mean a couple months ago, we had Dr. Frieder on again, and I knew he was going up for tenure. It was the end of the semester, like he had a lot of stuff going on. So it was like we could talk about current events and politics for the full episode. It's going to be stressful and frustrating. So I tried to make an effort to take a step back and say, like, what is keeping you sane during this time? Because you'll find that people really like that brush of or
Yeah,
like that fresh air that they get saying, oh, like, what music are you listening to? And for him, it was recent albums. And then you can get into like different
right.
discussions on that. And that lightheartedness is important for your guests' health as well,
And
because
to
it's a
see
lot of
the
work.
fullness of that
Yeah.
person. Yeah. I think you just hit on something really big. Our guests do so much preparation.
Yeah.
I'm always so grateful at the amount of preparation the guest does. And you do want to acknowledge that. And part of acknowledging that is I always send out an email thanking them afterwards
Yeah.
with the episode attached so that they can hear it and use it for their class or for their, to put on whatever they want to use it for. I also always tell them that I'm happy to have. I was gonna say I was gonna edit it, but Craig's
He's sitting over there.
so I'm always gonna allow somebody else to edit it, but I want my guests to be happy with what I put out in their with their voice attached to it. And if they say to me, Mary, hey, I misspoke, or I don't want you to add that part where I talk about blah blah blah, I'm happy to cut it out. Um, I just think that's the most fair thing. But I don't like to edit out mistakes that we make maybe in our speech or the ums and the huhs and all
Because that
that.
humanizes the
Well, that's how people
yeah
talk, and we are not scripted radio.
yeah
And this is how I talk. And my daughter says it's too slow. She talks too fast. What are you going to do?
hmm
Right. So I think that's something to think about as well. Like, what are the ethics of putting something out, and how much leeway do we give our guests? I let them choose exactly how much they want in or out. And then if I don't like that, I don't put the episode out.
yeah.
And I think I've done that maybe once. And I think that was actually just a matter of a terrible recording. Maybe I've done it twice, but I don't think I've ever pulled an episode because I know I haven't, because the conversation didn't go as I liked. Um, but if it's a terrible recording or they're not happy, you don't have to publish. Just because you made it, you don't have to publish it.
Yeah, like we always give that option to our guests, which I think is really great. Like if you ever say something that you really don't want in, thank Andy, Craig, Ian
Yes.
for doing that work. Like we're not going to act like we do that, but it's important to have that transparency with your guests because what you want is them to be comfortable to speak and for them to be comfortable to give their minds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all make mistakes, right? And we need to be able to, white it out. Old fashioned white out. It's a kind of old fashioned.
Mhm.
You don't even know what white out is.
Yes,
do
I
you?
do. We use that.
You did
Yes.
not win.
Our teachers use that. So
Anyway, we erase it.
Yeah.
Or we just cut it out. All right, let's talk a minute about, well, we have talked about how to book a guest. I just want to say that is the most difficult
Yeah.
part of it, is that you find the topic. That's easy and kind of fun, is deciding what the topic is. But then you got to find your guests. And that's a little trickier.
And I guess if you're like really good at networking already and you already like maybe it can be easier. I don't know if it's just like me, but like reaching out to people, especially at universities and institutions that are kind of under attack for a lot of different reasons. I've even gotten responses saying, I don't feel comfortable putting my voice out there in the public
Yeah.
view, which is a limitation of public philosophy and public history, really.
Yeah.
And in the new trends in scholarship is that people need to be vulnerable as well. And you can't expect that out of someone. And it's not your place to make them feel that way, like it
Yeah.
has to be them, so
They have to want to, and that being said, scholars are generally happy to talk about their
Yeah.
work. I mean, people, if they think you're genuinely interested and you show a genuine interest, they want to come to yes. Scheduling is tricky, that's for sure. But the way I approach it is I think of a topic I'm interested in at the moment and that I want to spend, the way How to Ruin Dinner works, and it didn't work this way all the time. I used to just, in the very beginning, every episode was about a different thing. Now, I was concentrated on religious studies at that point, and I think I did that for 2 or 3 years. And then I started to broaden out, and we widened the title to
Yeah.
Conversations from the University. And at that point, we have all these scholars here at UNF and scholars who know scholars. So we have this easy pool. But every semester, I generally start by asking people in my department,
Yeah.
who do you know that would want to talk about politics? That's what we did this semester of the election, right? Or who do you know that would be good to talk about, the virtues, which is what we hope to do
Planning on,
next
yeah.
semester. So you just have to start asking the people you know, who do they know?
Yeah.
The other way to do it is to cold email. Just send out emails. Find your person, an author's email address. Go on Amazon, follow the author,
Yeah.
whatever. It's if somebody's got something out pretty recently, they're going to want to talk about it. They're
Yeah.
incredibly generous.
And usually people don't get opportunities to do that either outside of, and this is maybe going back to the purpose of your podcast, they might not be able to do this outside of a conference that happens every
Yeah.
6 months. You know, like this is another opportunity for them. So think about it not as like that it's always the burden is on them, right? That they're sacrificing so much to show up. Sometimes they really want to do this too. So
Sometimes, I mean, it'd be nice to offer money, and
Yeah.
we don't have an honorarium that we could have access to, but trying to find money to pay guests to cover their costs would be nice.
or even at the end of the semester we did, the dinner
Yeah,
where
we had a
you invite guests, you try to give back in any way
Yeah.
that you can. Yeah.
It's a lot to ask because it's more than the hour that you're going to talk to the person. It's their prep time, and it's all the prep time they did to become an expert,
Yeah.
and you're just, picking their brain. And so in some way you want to acknowledge that guest has given you something. So a thank you note goes along. Just a simple thank you note is, I think, very, very much appreciated. But I do think that the how to book a guest is a tricky part of doing a good podcast and getting good guests. And also, I think there are more people around you than you realize, right?
Yeah.
That you do have access to more experts than you think you do.
And they know people who know
And
people.
they know people who know people.
And I really feel like it's a skill that you learn too, like getting this out and finding guests. Like you're not going to be good at it at the beginning. I know, like when I was basically being interviewed for this editorial assistant position, like a big pull, at least for me as a potential worker, was that I'd already been in conversation with professors through emailing, through either like cold emailing or in conversation, because it's a skill that you need to learn to try and bring people onto these
Right.
things, and you're not going to be good at it, right? Like you're not.
And let's just say, in the age of AI,
Yeah.
do not send out a email that isn't yours. Meaning, don't. My experience is to not be too formal, to have your own, to make clear what your voice is, so that they know, they can tell from the email what kind of experience the podcast is going to be. So I will often start with something that couldn't possibly be understood as rote in a, "Hi, how are you?" No.
Yeah.
"Hope you're doing well." No. Do not start. It's just,
Okay, well, this is where we would.
our age, I think it's too easy to have a formulaic.
I will say,
approach.
I will say though, I think maybe that's easier for you too, because you have more pedigree than, like for me, I feel like it almost comes off as a little disrespectful if I'm not very
Yeah, I can see
formulaic,
that.
because like, and this is where you need to introspect, like you need to think about who you are in this conversation too. For you, it's a professor to a professor. For me, it's a student, someone who is studying their work to this person. So it depends
I
too.
do think you also have to convey, like you would in an essay, a feeling of the tone,
Yeah.
right? And the tone of the conversation for me is always going to be casual.
Mm.
I want it to be casual, especially my end of it. So I try to write the emails in that kind of voice that is identifiable as mine. And yeah, finding for you maybe a respectful tone is more important than it is for me. But it's something worth thinking about. Like, how am I going to write this email? The starting is always the trickiest. And I think the temptation to use AI now in writing letters of recommendation, writing these kind of queries, there's, they can be super formulaic. And I think people are alert to that formulaic setup, and they don't really want to participate in it. if it comes from, and the same thing goes for developing the questions, right? You can use AI to develop the questions, but they're going to sound like AI developed the questions. But here, you and I know, will disagree again. What I would say is AI is a great starting place for you, maybe, right? To if you're hesitant on, well, what should I be asking? AI might get you going, right? And then from there you develop. But to your point, which is brilliant, you get over that imposter syndrome through research. You
Yeah.
get over the presentation of your own position through preparation.
Yeah, and so this is where our disagreements kind of come out. Like, I can't co-sign the AI approach to thinking about questions, but I will say though, like something that I try to do if I feel that I'm not prepared for some of these episodes, because obviously I'm not. Like if there's a guest for music coming on, like I'll just think about what my experience is with that topic, and then go through their work. Right, like
Yeah.
if you're at all familiar with humanities or social sciences or research work, like you can get interested in a topic really easy if you're working with, good materials, right? Like for our guests, if I go through their work and I don't have questions, there's a problem, right? If I read for 5 minutes of this person's dissertation, I'm gonna have a lot of questions for them. And in that way, you don't need experience, right? Like you
Right.
just need an
Preparation.
inquisitive mind in preparation. Yeah.
Right. The willingness to be curious can't be underestimated.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're almost at an hour here, so let's wrap it up. I think the other things that we didn't get to talk about too much is technical issues. And we're fortunate we're at a university and we have access to the help of producers, great equipment. And I do think the equipment matters. So get the
Yeah.
best microphones you can. And people record in their cars because that's where the sound is best. You figure out what you have access to and get the best sound you can. Nobody wants to listen to bad sound.
And I will say, like, having recorded in the CERT studio and the library student one, there is a noticeable difference. But the people at the library and the workers at the CERT studio too are always so helpful
Yeah.
with helping you figure out. So if the only barrier for you is technology, there will be people that will help you.
Especially if you have
Yes.
access to public spaces that
Yes.
are endowed. Libraries, not just university libraries, but particularly
Yeah.
university libraries, but you can find libraries that have equipment. I think the other thing I would say is that, today is our first day adding video.
Yeah.
Will I go back and look at the video? I guess I have to, since I'm going to tell you that one of the things you have to do is you have to listen to your own podcast.
Yeah.
And you have to try to be both gentle with yourself and demanding of yourself, and try to improve your speech patterns or notice speech patterns. And I know I say, and I know I'm slow, and I do want to force myself to address those issues. And at the same time, it has to be authentically you. But listening to your own podcast, one thing we cannot tell you about is how to advertise your podcast.
Okay, before you say that, because I got a lot to say on that too, but I wanted to add something on the last thing really
go
quick
ahead.
before we go on. Like, I noticed, like, yeah, my voice is raspy right now. Like, there's a lot that you can do outside of, the actual recording booth that will help with figuring out the presentation. But just listening to your own podcast and being critical yet not too hard, like being introspective, is a good skill even outside of podcasting.
And force yourself to note the good things about it. Oh, that
Yes,
was funny.
yes.
Or, oh, I liked when you've got to be gentle with yourself too, because what you want to do is build on your strengths, not just concentrate on your weaknesses. Your weaknesses will always be there. So really what you want to do is build on your and so you can't build on your strengths if you don't know what those strengths are.
And even if you're maybe just getting feedback for your essays from your professors, like at the university, like I know people who can't look at their own feedback or who won't. And it is challenging to be critiqued. I think a lot of my professors have done a good job at not laying it all on at one time, because that will make students run away as quick as they can. But like learning to not just cope, but to work with the feedback is really important. And listening to yourself too is only going to improve that skill. So
Right.
it's helpful.
And you never sound as bad to other people as you do to yourself. It's so hard in the beginning, but pretty soon you don't hear your voice. You listen for 5 minutes and you don't hear your voice anymore. But I do think that's an important part of developing a style.
And now we can get to marketing that we don't know anything about.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
don't listen to us. I mean, listen, we don't market very well.
We don't market. Let's just be honest.
Yeah. It's a separate skill entirely.
Yeah. And you could get somebody to do that for you, which you probably should.
Yeah, maybe if you know you have a colleague or a friend that's in something similar that needs, I don't want to say an internship because it wouldn't be something like that, but needs like reputable skills with that they can put down on a resume. Maybe you invite them to market for you and they can put that down. Make it mutually beneficial.
Yeah. Get an Instagram page.
Figure out how to make that work.
We can't make that work. You need to add some music to your intro and exit. You need to have some recognizable, repeatable parts of it. You need a logo kind of picture.
Be on Spotify, be on have a domain, don't make it hard to find your podcast, even if you're sending it to people. Like there's a lot of things that you can do.
That we're not doing.
That
we're going to start. Any day now we're going to start.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we don't want to be imposters and say we're doing it. We know what could be done and we're not doing it.
Yeah, which is important, right? Think about it, yeah.
Any last thoughts?
I don't think so.
Thank your producers who do so much work for us.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Neam, who books the studio for us. Well, we'll leave it there, and we wish you happy podcasting. It really is fun, so I encourage it. And it's a different way of learning, I would say. It's a different learning experience, so enjoy it.
Yep. Do your best, y'all.